All right, so tonight we're going to go into a little bit more about how we manage risk. And we talked in the last session about what is risk and what are some of the key vernacular around risk, and then jumped into going through and doing a demo, if you recall, of trying to do a little bit of background intelligence gathering on some individuals. Intellectual curiosity, typically after I show that, intellectual curiosity usually takes over, and most people either look up the significant other, maybe an ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend, or somebody long lost, somebody who you already haven't found on Facebook. And more than likely, if you're on the hunt, you're going to find them. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit further about managing risk, and have a couple of exercises here that are prudent and will help you whenever you see a question like this on your exam. So let's go through and talk about some of these things. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out what are all these different terms that are coming up, and why do we even need to have this discussion. So we make this this matrix of different threats, and then the vulnerability, and what could happen if something was perpetrated here. So if you just take a look at the top one, and then we'll enumerate down all the way through. Here, the threat agent for the top one is a virus. Middle one kind of makes sense here. They can exploit the lack of antivirus software. A virus can, if you're not running antivirus, then you're in trouble. And the result is a virus. Pretty straightforward, right? Really, out of all these, there's a couple that stick out to me. I mean, these are kind of pointed specifically at certain vectors, but I mean, if we just take a look here, a couple that really point out to me is the ID10T error right here. ID10T error, which is this guy. All users are stupid, right? So if somebody's gonna break something, it's a user, and usually it's called. You'll hear too, if you haven't heard it in your career with IT professionals, usually they'll call it the ID10T error because it looks like the word idiot, and you see that right there. So users are stupid, users are idiots, and they definitely can break something in any type of system that you have. One of the big deals that we've seen with some of the leaking of information is the insider threat. And from that, people can steal data, they can alter data and outputs. And if we're not actually watching what they do, then they could actually steal the keys to the kingdom. One of the ones that's really near and dear to my heart is a field that's needing more and more people to get into it, is software assurance. And this is specifically kind of important because if we can look at a poorly written application and then be able to maybe do a buffer overflow, or search for some dead code that's in there that's not being used, or maybe go and perform a denial of service on it, then there's a good chance that we can catch the failure in that poorly written application, and then inject our nastiness into that catching of the error. And we saw that with the Chinese whenever they did that with Operation Aurora, and Google in China, that happened too. It was a JavaScript heap exploit that they took, and the Chinese exploited JavaScript in the heap of Internet Explorer, and they were able to conduct a buffer overflow attack, and essentially through a heap spray got access to the command prompt on Google infrastructure in China. So it was quite clever of the Chinese to do that. Just something to think about as we continue to talk about some of this stuff. All right, so the next thing here that we're going to get into is some really interesting topics. This is, I think, the bread and butter of many of the questions that you're going to see on your exam. So when we talk about this a little, I think it'll become self-evident here. We have two different types of risk analysis here. They are the qualitative and the quantitative. Does anyone know what the difference is between the two?
Qualitative is going to be like a quality, quantitative is number based.
All right, so the professor in me says that you can't use a definition, the word in the definition to define itself, so that was a nice try, but qualitative I'm not going to give you. I'll give you quantitative because really, yes, it's numbers, it's dollars. Usually for qualitative, the easiest way to remember it is it's opinion based. So everybody's got an opinion, and based off of your background, you can go through and give a qualitative approach. And usually qualitative approaches they don't give you numeric values or numeric assessments or monetary assessments. They just give you a dollar amount, or I'm sorry, the quantitative gives you the dollar amount. When I think of the word qualitative, a lot of times I just think that, hey, somebody's guessing here. It's an opinion. That very well could be somebody's reputation, somebody's goodwill, or maybe some irreplaceable information, possibly pictures. Have you ever had you've lost pictures on a device, and doing a qualitative assessment may have given you some sort of subjective loss amount to what that was worth to you. And it just is quite interesting. So we get into a whole genre within cybersecurity is risk assessments. And first, before we can assess stuff, we got to know what stuff is there. So we got to identify the assets. Then we got to go and identify what threats are to those assets, and then figure out how we're going to calculate the risk accordingly. And then from that, we're able to do some pretty cool stuff, whether or not that includes but not is limited to doing a penetration test. Well, that's kind of depends on how much money the company is and what the agreement is. All right, so now that we've kind of gone through and from the bottom up here, we're going to go in and talk about some of these other things here. So we actually have a couple of different things that I want to talk about really quickly that you absolutely will see on the exam. And one of them is this thing called the SLE, the single loss expectancy. Single loss expectancy. And the SLE is quite interesting. If you think about it, it really could be as simple as the word says, that how much do you think you're going to lose if something happens one time? How much do you think you're going to lose if something happens one time? It's a monetary value, and it can be divided up into two components. It is divided up into this thing called the exposure factor down here. So I'll just say it can be divided into the EF and the asset values. So how much are the values worth? Remember, going through and identifying the assets. And then what is their exposure? What is their exposure? And then from that, you can get this monetary value of the SLE, the single loss expectancy. So having said that, in your mind, what do you think? Who do you think would use this formula probably every day, if not multiple times in a day? What profession would use this? Nobody wants to guess? Well, I'm sure you all pay insurance. And if you're ever wondering, well, how in the heck did they come up with that number? Well, they use all these formulas we're about to get wicked on, and it starts with the single loss expectancy. So the insurance industry, the healthcare industry, the financial industry, anybody who is in the interest of money and making money will go through and do a risk assessment and put in these variables inside of this. So the ale up top here, right underneath it, is not something you drink. I know, get your head out the gutter. This is the annual loss expectancy, and that is too, and also, or it is also a monetary measure of how much loss you could expect in a year. So that kind of makes sense, right? Annualized loss expectancy. And then down here we have the ARO, the ARO, or the annualized rate of occurrence. And I think that this makes sense. It's the likelihood often drawn between historical data and an event occurring within a year is the annualized rate of occurrence. So the interesting thing is, and this is probably the most important thing that I'm going to show you here, is what you're going to see on the exam, the SLE, single loss expectancy, times the annualized rate of occurrence, ARO, equals the ALE. Okay, so the single loss expectancy times the annualized rate of occurrence equals the annual loss expectancy. So it's quite interesting that the some of the things that you can do whenever you're going through and checking some stuff out with this. So we're going to go through and do an exercise here in a second. But before we do, one thing that I'm going to give you a heads up on is if you're interested in learning more about conducting risk assessments and what they are, what they do and how to do them, I'm going to recommend that you go out to this website called NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So NIST. And underneath NIST, they got all these different numbers out there, but you can check 800-30 Rev 1. And if you're having trouble falling asleep, this would be a great time for you to go out and read that document because it's going to be a little bit dry, but it'll actually tell you how to do a risk assessment. And even if you're in the commercial world, you can use any of the NIST documentation because a lot of times they'll work with some of the best institutes in the world, like Carnegie Mellon up in Pittsburgh, or MIT or Stanford or University of Florida. Any of those would be one of the things that they may end up using. So let's just go through this real quick. I want to do a simple scenario, and then I'll give you a little bit to go through and actually do a practical exercise here. So if we were conducting a risk assessment um, of a company that faces security perspective, some sort of security situation, what steps would we might want to develop to get an overview of the company's problems? Well, first thing is that you're going to go through and you're going to probably do a series of interviews, right? You're going to go through and interview the Barney Big Nuts of each department. So for us, that would be department heads, the VPs, the senior VPs, the really the people that have stuff up in their head that you'd be able to glean intelligence, and then probably figure out what existing vulnerabilities you'd be able to deduce from that. one of the things that the first thing that usually if I get engaged with a customer, I'll go out and I'll ask for a network architecture document. And I'd say in the 18 years that I've been doing this, um, I can I probably remember every time that I ask for a network topology diagram and I get a look from a person that either says, "What is that?" or "We don't have one." And I think to myself, well, my goodness, we are in trouble. Um, but usually that's what I want to see. I want to see a network architecture because I usually, if I don't see that, then I'm just kind of blowing in the wind there. But definitely that would be the second thing. And third thing, usually that I would recommend that you do with the risk assessment is go and do a physical assessment. As long as you have permission, see if you can do a physical security test on the facility to evaluate whatever physical risk you may be able to see. Um, they may have a guard at the front, but is there a glitch on one of the back doors? Or does the guard check badges every single time? And if they do, then great. But if you're clever, usually from a physical perspective, uh, it's quite interesting some of the things that you can do. I'll give you an example here. Tell you a story that I usually will teach in the brick and mortar classes that I do. Um, for physical, one of the stories that I like to tell is there was a project where we needed to find out some information about a bank, and one of the guys had an idea to go into the bank and bring a couple other people with us. And one of them was a hot, um, blonde, and she was good looking, and she was the decoy going into this bank. And then another person came in as a service technician with a mop bucket, and then the third person was the person that was going to go get the information out of the server room for physical penetration testing, and we had permission for it. So the blonde walks in the front door, and it was all timed sequentially to be about 30 seconds apart the way that it happened. But the blonde walks into the front door, so she comes through the front door, and she keeps walking, and the security guards over here, he's got eyes on target right there, and he's watching her go up to the cash register, and then his eyes go away from the door, just like we anticipated. Well, we send in our mop bucket guy, and our mop bucket guy, he takes the mop bucket and he accidentally, oh no, it goes all over the floor. Well, this guy it was looking at her. He didn't even see this dude come in and spill it all over the floor. So human nature says, well, you know what? I got to help this guy. So he actually comes off a post here and starts to help. And then the third person comes in behind the scene back to the guarded area, and it was able to get into the server room and download the information onto a USB drive. Uh, it was just a clever approach that, in that particular case, it worked. So that was kind of neat. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through and I'm going to give you a quick practical exercise. And you're going to figure out some of these right here. So the SLE, you remember, is called the single loss expectancy. And the ALE is the annualized loss expectancy. So the SLE is figured out a monetary value from the asset value and the exposure factor, if you recall. And we have this other thing that's called the ARO. So the ARO is the likelihood of an event occurring within a given year. So the way that this works, that if we go in and we'll actually figure these things out, you can look at it. Really, the most confusing thing for people is Well, what's this ARO? The ARO in this particular case is, hey, there's a 10% chance of the event occurring in a year. This is a 100th% chance. This is a 10th% chance. This is a 100% chance, and then this is 3 times in a year that this could possibly happen. Okay, so that's kind of what we're looking at here, and from that we can deduce that, hey, if a facility catches on fire, the single loss expectancy is this, 10% of that is this, and here are the numbers for each one of them. You can kind of go down the line here and figure them out, and that's what I would expect you to do. So take a look at this for a second, because we're going to do practical exercise on the next slide. Just some one more thing about the difference between qualitative and a quantitative. Remember, quantitative means numbers, qualitative means opinions, and some simple ways to remember it here. Requires no calculations. It's a qualitative, right? Because everybody's got an opinion. So there you go. You could be a qualitative risk assessor tomorrow if you want it, because you got an opinion about something. Requires complex calculations. That's quantitative because it gives numbers. Involves a high degree of guesswork. Well, that's an opinion, right? We could say meteorologists are qualitative risk assessors. So check it out. What I want you to do is this practical exercise here, the computing risk assessments. And here it is. So you're the administrator of a web server for Amazon that generates about $25,000 per hour in revenue. Probability of the web server failing during the year is estimated to be 25%. Failure would lead to 3 hours of downtime and cost $5,000 in components to correct. What is the ail? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to figure this out, and then I'll come back and give you the answer. And I'll leave it up on the screen for you.